I saw the message calling me there, free Maid, for the weekend, and in that moment, something inside me went completely still. It wasn't anger, not the kind that makes you raise your voice or slam a door. It was quieter than that. Colder. The kind of realization that doesn't break you right away, but settles deep in your chest like a truth you can't unlearn. I had been standing in my kitchen, the late afternoon sun coming through the window over the sink, turning the clean dishes into little reflections of light. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I picked it up without thinking, expecting maybe a grocery list or another. "Can you pick this up on your way?" Message from my son Daniel. Instead, I saw the family group chat. Jessica had sent a message, followed by a string of laughing emojis. "Don't worry about the weekend," she wrote. "We've got our free maid coming. Margaret will handle everything like always." There were replies almost immediately. My son added a thumbs up. My granddaughter sent a heart, probably not even understanding what it meant. And then another message from Jessica. "Seriously, I'm not lifting a finger this time. I need a break." I read it once. Then again. I didn't reply. I didn't type. I didn't even sigh. I just locked my phone and set it back down on the counter, as if it had suddenly become something fragile. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. For a long moment I stood there, staring at nothing, letting the words echo in my mind. Free Maid. Not Mom. Not Grandma. Not even Margaret. Just a role. A function. A convenience. And the worst part wasn't that Jessica said it. It was that Daniel agreed without hesitation. That small blue thumbs up felt louder than anything else in that thread. I moved slowly after that, finishing the dishes I had already started, drying each plate carefully, placing it back in the cabinet like I always did. Routine had always been my comfort. For years I had been the one who made things run smoothly. Holiday dinners, birthday parties, last-minute babysitting when Jessica needed a break. I told myself it was love. That this was what family did. You showed up. You helped. You made things easier for the people you cared about. The upcoming weekend had been no different. Our annual family trip to the lake house. I had already started preparing 2 days ago. I'd made a list of groceries long enough to fill half a cart. I'd planned meals that I knew everyone liked. Daniel loved my pot roast. The kids always asked for my blueberry pancakes in the morning. Even Jessica had her preferences, though she rarely said thank you when I made them. I told myself that didn't matter. That being needed was enough. But standing there in my kitchen, with that message still fresh in my mind, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else would notice. Just a quiet adjustment, like a picture frame being set straight after years of hanging slightly crooked. I walked over to the small desk by the window and sat down. My phone was still there on the counter, but I didn't reach for it again. Instead, I looked out at the backyard. The grass needed trimming. The flower bed along the fence had started to bloom, little hints of color pushing through the soil. It was peaceful. Simple. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself a question I hadn't allowed before. When was the last time anyone did something for me? Not out of obligation. Not because it was convenient. Just because they wanted to. I couldn't remember. The realization didn't come with tears. It came with clarity. I had spent so many years making sure everyone else was comfortable that I had quietly stepped into a role they never questioned. The one who cooks. The one who cleans. The one who shows up early and leaves late. The one who doesn't complain. The one who can always be counted on. The one who doesn't have plans of her own. Free Maid. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. If that's what they saw, then maybe it was time they learned what happened when that person wasn't there. I stood up, walked back to the kitchen, and picked up my phone again. The group chat was still open, more messages now about what time they should leave on Friday, who was bringing drinks, who was in charge of music. No one asked if I was okay. No one even noticed I hadn't responded. I didn't type anything. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened a different app. One I hadn't used in years. My finger hovered for a second, then moved with quiet certainty. If they expected me to be there, to cook, to clean, to take care of everything while they relaxed, then this weekend was going to be different. Not because I was going to argue. Not because I was going to explain. But because I simply wouldn't be there at all. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my mind would not let me sleep any longer. The house was still quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful but now felt revealing, like it was showing me something I had ignored for years. I made my coffee the same way I always did, 2 scoops of ground beans, a little more water than the machine suggested because I preferred it slightly lighter. I stood by the counter while it brewed, listening to the slow drip, 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 and for once, I did not rush to start a list in my head. No grocery planning. No mental checklist of what needed to be packed for the weekend. No reminders about extra towels or snacks for the kids. Just silence. I carried my mug to the dining table and sat down, wrapping my hands around the warmth as if I needed to hold on to something steady. My phone lit up again. More messages in the group chat. Jessica asking if I could pick up extra paper towels on my way. Daniel adding that I always knew which brand everyone liked. There was no question in their words, no pause, no moment of consideration. It was already decided. I would be there. I would handle it. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on the table. I did not answer. Instead, I took a slow sip of my coffee and let the bitterness settle on my tongue. It felt appropriate somehow. For years I had told myself that this was what family looked like when children grew up. That roles shifted. That mother stepped back but still supported quietly from behind the scenes. I convinced myself that being needed was the same as being valued. But now, sitting there with the morning light stretching across the table, I could see the difference clearly. Being needed meant they relied on what I did. Being valued meant they cared about who I was. And somewhere along the way, I had allowed those two things to blur into one. I finished my coffee slowly, then stood up and rinsed the mug in the sink. My movements were calm, almost deliberate, as if I was learning how to move through my own life again without rushing ahead for someone else. When I walked back into the living room, I noticed the small suitcase in the closet. I had not used it in years. Not since my husband and I took that short trip to Arizona before he passed. I opened the closet door and looked at it for a moment. Dust settled lightly on the surface, handle still intact, wheels probably stiff from sitting unused. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. The sound of it rolling across the hardwood felt louder than it should have, like a declaration in an otherwise quiet house. I knelt down, unzipped it, and opened it slowly. It smelled faintly of old fabric and time. For a second, I hesitated, my hands resting on the edge, as memories tried to pull me back into the version of myself that would have closed it again, and returned to planning someone else's weekend. But that version of me had read that message yesterday. And she could not unsee it. I stood up and walked to my bedroom. My closet was still neatly organized, rows of clothes I wore out of habit more than anything else. Practical outfits. Comfortable shoes. Things that made it easier to move through a day of cooking, cleaning, and taking care of others. I reached past them and pulled out something I had not worn in a long time. A light summer dress. Soft fabric, pale blue, something my husband once said made me look like I belonged near the ocean. I held it up for a moment, feeling the texture between my fingers, then placed it carefully into the suitcase. One item. Then another. Not rushed. Not frantic. Just steady. I packed as if I had all the time in the world, because for once I did. My phone buzzed again somewhere behind me, but I did not go to check it. I already knew what it would be. Another assumption. Another request. Another reminder of the role they expected me to play. Instead, I continued packing, choosing each piece with quiet intention. By the time I closed the suitcase, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed around me, but because something had shifted inside me. I zipped it up, stood there for a moment, and then allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They were planning a weekend where I would take care of everything. They were counting on it. And for the first time in years, I was about to let them down in a way they would not forget. I did not check my phone for the rest of that morning, and that alone felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling at first, like I had stepped out of a rhythm I had followed for years without question. By noon, curiosity brushed against me, not out of concern, but out of habit. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and glanced at the screen. There were 8 new messages in the group chat. Jessica had sent a reminder about arrival times, followed by a message asking if I had already started preparing the meals ahead of time. Daniel added that traffic might be heavy on Friday and it would help if I got there early to get everything set up before they arrived. There it was again, not a request, not even a polite suggestion, just an expectation already placed neatly on my shoulders. I read each message slowly, letting the words settle without reacting. Then I locked the screen and placed the phone down again, this time without even the slightest pull to respond. Instead, I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the suitcase I had packed. It was still there, quiet and steady, like a decision that had already been made. I thought about all the weekends that came before this one. The ones where I arrived first, carrying bags of groceries, unlocking the lake house, opening windows to let the air in, wiping down counters before anyone else even stepped through the door. I remembered the sound of laughter from the living room while I stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The way conversations would continue without pause as I cleared plates and loaded the dishwasher. The small, automatic, "Thanks, Mom," that barely lingered long enough to feel real. At the time, I told myself it was enough. That being included in the background was still being included. But now, sitting there in the quiet, those memories felt different. They felt one-sided. Carefully arranged in a way where I gave and they simply received. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtains slightly to the side. The sky was clear, a soft blue stretching without interruption. It reminded me of something distant, something open, something I had not allowed myself to consider in a long time. Freedom did not have to be loud. It did not have to come with a speech or a confrontation. Sometimes it could be as simple as choosing not to show up where you were expected to disappear. My phone buzzed again on the nightstand, breaking the silence. This time, I walked over and picked it up, not to reply, but to observe. Jessica had sent another message, this one with a list. Groceries. Cleaning supplies. Snacks for the kids. She ended it with, "Margaret, you can handle this like usual, right?" I looked at the words, at my name placed there so casually, attached to a responsibility that was never discussed, only assumed. For a moment, I imagined typing something back. A simple no. Or maybe a question. "Why do you think this is my job?" But I did not. Because anything I said would turn into a conversation, and conversations could be dismissed, redirected, explained away. What I was about to do could not be argued with. I set the phone back down and turned away from it completely. The afternoon passed quietly. I moved through the house without urgency, without the usual pressure of preparing for someone else's needs. I made myself a light lunch, something simple, and sat down to eat it at the table without distraction. No multitasking. No checking messages between bites. Just a meal, for me. It felt almost unfamiliar, like I was learning how to occupy my own life again. Later, I returned to the suitcase and added a few more things. A pair of comfortable shoes. A light sweater. Sunglasses I had not worn in years. Each item felt like a small step away from the version of myself they had grown used to. By the time evening came, the house was filled with a calm I had not experienced in a long time. Not the kind of calm that comes from everything being done, but the kind that comes from knowing you no longer have to do it at all. I checked my phone one last time before setting it aside for the night. More messages. More assumptions. More plans being made around my presence, my effort, my time. I did not respond. I did not need to. Because for the first time, the weekend they were so carefully organizing did not include me, even if they did not know it yet. And when they realized it, it would not be because I told them. It would be because I simply was not there. Friday morning arrived without any urgency, and that alone felt like a quiet rebellion against everything they had come to expect from me. In previous years, I would have been up before sunrise, packing the car with grocery bags, checking lists one last time, making sure nothing was forgotten. I would have already been on the road by now, driving the familiar 2 hours to the lake house, arriving before anyone else so that everything would be ready when they walked in. But this morning, I moved slowly. I made my coffee, just like the day before, and stood by the window while the sky shifted from pale gray to soft gold. There was no checklist waiting for me. No pressure sitting on my shoulders. Just time. My suitcase stood by the front door, closed and ready, not for the lake house, but for something entirely different. I glanced at my phone sitting on the kitchen counter. It had been lighting up since early morning, the screen flashing with notifications I had not bothered to read. For a moment I considered picking it up, just to see how they were reacting to my silence. But I already knew. Confusion at first. Then mild annoyance. Eventually expectation would turn into frustration. Because in their world, I did not simply disappear. I showed up. I handled things. I made everything easier. That was the role they had written for me, and I had followed it for so long that they never imagined I would step out of it. I picked up the phone anyway, more out of curiosity than concern, and unlocked it. The group chat was filled with messages now. Jessica asking if I was already on the road. Daniel sending a short "Mom?" followed by a question mark. Another message from Jessica, this one slightly sharper, asking if I had forgotten something important. I read them all without reacting, my expression unchanged. Then I locked the phone and set it down again, face down this time, as if closing a door I had no intention of reopening. I walked to the front door, slipped on my shoes, and reached for the suitcase handle. The motion felt simple, ordinary even, but there was something deeper underneath it. A quiet certainty. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, and paused for just a second on the porch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of morning and something new I could not quite name yet. For years, stepping out of this house meant going somewhere for someone else. Today, it meant going somewhere for myself. The drive to the airport was smooth, the roads still relatively empty in the early hours. I kept the radio off, letting the silence fill the car. It was not uncomfortable. It was steady. Grounding. At a red light, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I saw the same woman who had spent years putting everyone else first. But there was something different now. Not in how I looked, but in how I held myself. A subtle shift. Like I was no longer waiting for permission to exist outside of what they needed me to be. When I arrived at the airport, I parked the car and took a deep breath before stepping out. The building stood ahead of me, busy but calm in its own way, people moving in different directions, each one carrying their own plans, their own destinations. I pulled my suitcase from the trunk and started walking toward the entrance. My phone buzzed again in my bag, persistent now, but I did not stop. I did not check. Whatever was happening in that group chat, whatever confusion or irritation was building, it no longer required my attention. Inside the terminal, the air was cooler, filled with the low hum of conversations and rolling suitcases. I moved through it with quiet purpose, checking in, printing my boarding pass, following the signs without hesitation. Each step felt like it was leading me further away from something I had carried for too long. At security, I placed my belongings in the tray, watching them move along the belt without worry. There was a strange lightness in that moment, as if I had left more behind than just the things in my bag. When I reached my gate, I found a seat by the window and sat down, placing my suitcase beside me. Planes moved slowly outside, lining up, taking off, disappearing into the open sky. I watched one lift into the air, steady and certain, and felt something settle inside me. My phone buzzed again, louder this time against the quiet around me. I reached into my bag, pulled it out, and looked at the screen. Multiple missed calls now. messages piling up. I did not open them. Instead, I turned the phone off completely and slipped it back into my bag. Then I leaned back in my seat, looked out at the runway, and allowed myself a small, calm breath. They were waiting for me at the lake house, expecting me to walk through the door, groceries in hand, ready to take over like always. But this time, when they looked around and realized nothing was prepared, no one was there to take care of things, it would not be because I forgot. It would be because I chose not to come at all. The plane lifted off the runway with a steady hum, and as the ground slowly pulled away beneath me, I felt something else loosen its grip as well, something I had carried quietly for years without ever naming it. I sat by the window, my hands resting calmly in my lap, watching as the city below became smaller, less detailed, until it was nothing more than shapes and colors blending into the distance. For so long, my world had been defined by routines that revolved around other people, their schedules, their needs, their expectations. Now, for the first time in a very long time, I was moving in a direction that had nothing to do with any of that. The seatbelt sign remained on, the soft chime echoing through the cabin, and I leaned my head slightly against the window, letting the quiet settle around me. There was no urgency here, no list waiting to be completed, no one calling my name from another room asking for something small that would turn into something more. Just the steady rhythm of the flight, and the open sky stretching endlessly ahead. Somewhere below, they were arriving at the lake house. I could picture it clearly without needing to be there. The gravel crunching under their tires as they pulled in, the sound of car doors opening, voices overlapping as they stepped out, expecting everything to be ready. I imagined Jessica walking up to the front door, keys in hand, perhaps already talking about how nice it would be to finally relax for the weekend. Daniel carrying bags, maybe glancing around, assuming I was already inside. The door opening. The pause. That small moment where something feels off before anyone says it out loud. The house would be quiet. No smell of food cooking. No groceries neatly put away. No counters wiped down, no beds prepared, no sense that someone had been there ahead of them making everything easier. Just an empty space waiting to be filled. I could almost hear the shift in their voices, confusion first, then irritation. Jessica asking where I was. Daniel checking his phone, expecting to see a message he somehow missed. Another call placed, another message sent. The realization would not come all at once. It would build slowly, like a puzzle missing a piece they had always taken for granted. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of exhaustion, but to sit with that image without reacting to it. Not with satisfaction, not with guilt, just with understanding. This was not about punishing them. It was about allowing them to experience something they had never considered before. What it felt like when I was not there to carry everything quietly in the background. The flight attendant moved down the aisle, offering drinks, her voice calm and practiced. When she reached my row, I looked up and gave a small, polite smile. "Just water, please," I said, my voice steady. She handed me the cup, and I thanked her, taking a slow sip as I turned my attention back to the window. The clouds stretched out beneath us now, soft and endless, like a barrier between the life I had known and the one I was beginning to step into. My phone remained off in my bag, silent and unreachable, and for once, that silence did not feel like something I needed to fix. It felt like something I had chosen. I thought about how many times I had rearranged my own plans, my own time, to fit into theirs. How often I had said yes without even pausing to consider whether I wanted to. It had become automatic, almost invisible, like breathing. And because I never questioned it, either did they. Somewhere along the way, my willingness had turned into expectation. And expectation had turned into entitlement. Not because they were cruel, but because I had made it easy for them to believe that this was simply how things worked. I'd opened my eyes again and looked out at the horizon, where the sky met something brighter in the distance. There was a lightness in my chest that I had not felt in years, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just present. Real. The kind of feeling that does not demand attention but quietly changes how you move through the world. Back at the lake house, the situation would be unfolding in its own way. Calls unanswered. Messages ignored. Maybe frustration turning into arguments, small at first, then sharper as the reality settled in. Who was going to cook? Who was going to clean? Who was going to take care of the children when everyone else wanted to relax? The roles they had never questioned would suddenly be up for discussion. And for the first time, my absence would not be invisible. It would be undeniable. I adjusted slightly in my seat, the movement small but intentional, and let out a slow breath. This was not about proving anything to them. It was about finally choosing something for myself without explanation, without permission, without the need to justify it. The plane continued forward, steady and certain, and as it did, I allowed myself to simply be a passenger in my own life for once, not the one responsible for making everything run smoothly, not the one holding everything together, just someone moving toward a place that existed entirely outside of their expectations. And that, more than anything else, felt like the beginning of something I had almost forgotten I was allowed to have. When the plane finally began its descent, I opened my eyes to a sky that looked different from the one I had left behind, brighter, warmer, stretching wide in a way that felt almost symbolic, even if I did not say it out loud. The announcement came softly over the speaker, welcoming us to our destination, and I sat there for a moment, letting the words settle before I reached for my bag. My phone was still inside, powered off, untouched since I had taken my seat hours earlier. I did not turn it on. Not yet. There was no urgency waiting for me here, no one expecting me to arrive and immediately take over. Just a place I had chosen, for no one else but myself. As the plane touched down, there was a gentle jolt, followed by the steady slowing of motion, and I found myself taking a deeper breath than I had in a long time. Not because I needed it, but because it felt natural. Like my body understood something my mind was only beginning to catch up with. I stood when it was time, moving with the rest of the passengers, but without the usual impatience I had always carried during travel. There was no one waiting on the other end asking where I was, no text I needed to answer, no explanation required. I stepped into the aisle, retrieved my suitcase, and followed the slow line forward, each step measured, unhurried. The airport here was larger, more open, filled with a different kind of energy. Conversations in unfamiliar accents drifted through the air, mixing with the sound of rolling luggage and distant announcements. I moved through it quietly, observing rather than reacting, letting myself take it in without rushing past it like I used to when my focus was always somewhere else. At baggage claim, I stood off to the side, watching the carousel turn, bags circling one after another. There was something almost calming about the repetition, the predictability of it, and I realized how rarely I allowed myself to simply stand still without feeling like I should be doing something else. When my suitcase appeared, I stepped forward, lifted it carefully, and pulled it off the belt with a steady motion. No one was there to grab it for me. No one needed me to hurry. It was a small thing, but it felt significant in a way I could not fully explain. Outside, the air was warmer, carrying a light breeze that felt different against my skin, softer somehow. I paused just beyond the exit doors, adjusting my grip on the suitcase handle, and looked around. Cars moved steadily along the curb, drivers calling out, people greeting one another, each moment unfolding without any connection to the life I had stepped away from, even if only for a short time. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and held it for a moment without turning it on. I could feel the weight of it in my hand, not physically, but in everything it represented. Messages waiting. Calls unanswered. Questions building. For years I would have turned it on immediately, checking, responding, fixing whatever needed to be fixed. Today, I slipped it back into my bag without pressing the button. There would be time for that later. Or maybe there would not. And for once, that was not something I needed to decide right away. I walked toward the taxi stand, joining the short line, the sound of voices blending into the background. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and gave the driver the address I had written down earlier, my voice calm, my words clear. He nodded, helped place my suitcase in the trunk, and opened the door for me. I settled into the back seat, watching as the airport slowly faded behind us, replaced by roads I did not recognize, buildings that felt new, unfamiliar, full of possibility rather than expectation. The drive was quiet, the city moving around me in a steady rhythm, and I allowed myself to simply observe it without trying to place it into something known. Back at the lake house, I knew things would not be quiet anymore. The absence I had created would have settled in fully by now. The empty kitchen. The unopened cabinets. The realization that nothing had been prepared, that no one had stepped in to take care of it all before they arrived. Calls would have turned into frustration by now. Messages sharper, more demanding. Perhaps even accusations, confusion turning into something heavier. But here, in the back seat of that car, none of it reached me. None of it defined this moment. I rested my head lightly against the seat and looked out the window as the scenery shifted, feeling something steady settle deeper inside me. This was not about running away. It was not about avoiding responsibility. It was about understanding that I had carried responsibilities that were never truly mine to begin with. And now, for the first time, I was allowing myself to set them down without asking anyone if that was acceptable. The car turned onto a quieter road, lined with trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and I watched as the sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns that moved across the pavement. It was simple, peaceful, and completely separate from the life I had left behind, at least for now. When the car finally slowed and came to a stop in front of my destination, I opened the door and stepped out, feeling the warmth of the air wrap around me in a way that felt almost welcoming. The driver handed me my suitcase, and I thanked him with a small nod before turning toward the building in front of me. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. The quiet. The choice. The absence of expectation. Then I reached for the handle of my suitcase and walked forward, not as someone arriving to take care of others, but as someone finally arriving for herself. The building in front of me was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not empty but calm, like it was designed for people who had chosen to step away from something louder. I walked through the entrance, the cool air brushing against my skin as the door closed softly behind me, and for a moment, I simply stood there, taking it in. The lobby was open and bright, sunlight filtering through tall windows, casting long, warm patterns across the floor. A woman behind the front desk looked up and offered a polite smile, the kind that did not expect anything from me in return. I gave a small nod, returning the gesture, and approached with steady steps. "Checking in?" she asked gently, her voice calm and unhurried. I nodded. "Yes," I said, giving my name. She typed it in, her movements efficient but unpressured, and within moments she handed me a key card along with a brief explanation of where to go. No rush. No assumption. Just simple interaction. I thanked her, picked up my suitcase, and made my way toward the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for my floor. As the elevator moved upward, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. For a second, I paused, really looking at myself. Not just the lines on my face or the silver in my hair, but something deeper. There was a stillness there, a kind of quiet strength I had not noticed before, or maybe had not allowed myself to see. The doors opened, and I stepped out into a hallway that was just as calm as the lobby below. My footsteps were soft against the carpet as I walked to my room, the keycard sliding easily into place. When the door opened, I stepped inside and closed it behind me, setting my suitcase down gently near the bed. The room was simple but welcoming. A large window overlooked a stretch of greenery, trees swaying lightly in the breeze, the sky beyond them wide and open. I walked toward the window, placing my hand lightly against the glass, and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me again. There was no television playing in the background. No voices calling out from another room. No list waiting for me to check off one task after another. Just space. I turned back toward the room and slowly began to unpack, not out of necessity, but out of intention. Each item placed carefully where it belonged, not because someone else would need it, but because I wanted it there. The dress I had chosen the day before, the one I had not worn in years, I hung it near the window, letting the light touch the fabric. It felt like more than just clothing. It felt like a reminder of something I had set aside for too long. My phone remained in my bag, silent, untouched, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to reach for it. Whatever was happening back at the lake house had already unfolded without me. They would have arrived by now. They would have opened the door and stepped into a space that did not welcome them in the way they expected. The kitchen would be empty. No meals prepared. No groceries stocked. The counters bare, the refrigerator holding only what had been left there from the last visit. I could almost see Jessica standing there, her expression shifting from confusion to frustration, her voice sharper now as she asked where I was. Daniel checking his phone again, calling, waiting, trying to make sense of something that had never happened before. The children asking questions that no one had answers to. Who is going to cook? What are we going to eat? Why is Grandma not here? I did not imagine it with satisfaction. I imagined it with clarity. Because for once, they were experiencing something I had felt in a different way for years. The absence of support they had come to rely on without ever acknowledging it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands resting lightly in my lap, and let out a slow breath. The room felt steady around me, like it was holding space for something new to take shape. Not a dramatic change. Not something loud or overwhelming. Just a shift. A quiet realignment of where I stood in my own life. Outside, the trees continued to move gently in the breeze, the light shifting as the afternoon stretched on. Time passed without pressure, without urgency, and I allowed it to move that way. For once, I was not measuring it against what needed to be done next. I was simply letting it exist. After a while, I stood up and walked back to my bag, unzipping it slowly. My phone was still there, waiting, filled with messages I had not read, calls I had not answered. I picked it up, holding it in my hand for a moment, feeling its familiar weight. This time, I turned it on. The screen lit up immediately, notifications appearing one after another, stacking on top of each other in rapid succession. Missed calls. Messages. Voicemails. The pattern was clear without even opening them. Urgency. Confusion. Frustration. I did not open the group chat. I did not listen to the voicemails. Instead, I opened the camera. I turned toward the window, the light soft and warm, the trees swaying gently outside, and I held the phone steady for a moment before taking a single photo. It was simple. Calm. Nothing dramatic. But it was real. Then I opened the group chat, scrolled past the messages without reading them, and placed the photo into the text box. My fingers hovered for just a second, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. This was not a reaction. It was a statement. Quiet. Clear. Final in its own way. I pressed send, locked the phone, and set it down beside me. Then I leaned back slightly, looking out the window again, and let the silence return, knowing that this time, it would not go unnoticed. The message did not sit quietly for long. Within seconds of sending the photo, the screen lit up again, the notification stacking faster than before, as if the silence I had held for so long had suddenly been broken in a way they did not know how to handle. I did not rush to pick up the phone. I let it rest beside me on the bed, vibrating softly against the fabric, each buzz a reminder of something shifting on the other side. When I finally reached for it, I did not open the thread right away. I simply held it in my hand, feeling the weight of what I had just done. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just undeniable. When I unlocked the screen, the group chat was already filled with messages, the tone different now. No longer casual. No longer assuming. Jessica's name appeared over and over again, her words coming faster than anyone else's. Where are you? What is this? Are you seriously not here? The punctuation alone carried more emotion than anything she had written before. Daniel's messages followed, shorter, less certain. Mom? What is going on? Why are you not answering? I read them slowly, not skimming, not reacting, just taking them in for what they were. Not concern. Not worry. Confusion. Disruption. The absence they were experiencing was not emotional. It was practical. Something was not functioning the way it always had, and they did not know how to adjust. A new message appeared as I watched. Jessica again. We just got here. There is nothing. No food. No groceries. Did you forget? I paused on that word. Forget. As if this was an accident. As if my presence had been expected in the same way the sun rises every morning, something that simply happens without question. I set the phone down again, letting the message sit unanswered. Outside the window, the light had shifted slightly, the sun moving lower, casting longer shadows across the ground. The trees continued their slow, steady movement in the breeze, untouched by anything happening miles away. I stood up and walked over to the window, resting my hand lightly against the glass again. The calm in the room remained unchanged. It did not react to their messages. It did not adjust to their frustration. It simply existed, steady and quiet. Behind me, the phone buzzed again. Then again. The pattern continued faster now, more insistent. Calls began to come through, one after another, the screen lighting up with Daniel's name, then Jessica's, then Daniel again. I did not answer. I did not decline. I let them ring until they stopped on their own. Each missed call was not a rejection. It was a boundary. A simple one. Clear. Unspoken, but impossible to ignore. I returned to the bed and sat down, picking up the phone once more. This time, I opened the thread again, scrolling slowly through the messages. The tone had shifted further. The confusion was turning into something sharper. This is not funny. We needed you here. The kids are hungry. What are we supposed to do now? That last message stayed on the screen a little longer than the others. What are we supposed to do now? I read it again, not with satisfaction, but with recognition. For years, that question had never been asked out loud because the answer had always been me. I had filled that space without being acknowledged as the one holding it together. Now, for the first time, they were facing the question without that answer already in place. I leaned back slightly, letting the phone rest in my hand as I looked toward the window again. The contrast between the two worlds felt almost surreal. There, chaos building in small, sharp messages. Here, stillness holding its ground. Without effort. Another message appeared. This time from Daniel. Mom, please just call me. The word please stood out. It was softer. Less certain. Not a command. Not an expectation. Something closer to what should have been there all along. I stared at it for a moment, then locked the phone again without replying. Not because I wanted to ignore him, but because this moment was not about rushing back to fix what had been disrupted. It was about letting the disruption exist long enough for it to be understood. I set the phone down on the nightstand and stood up, walking slowly toward the door. The room remained exactly as I had left it. Quiet. Steady. Mine. I stepped outside into a hallway, the soft carpet absorbing the sound of my footsteps, and made my way toward the elevator. There was no urgency in my movement. No pull to return to the messages waiting behind me. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection again in the mirrored wall. The same face. The same lines. But something had changed in the way I looked at myself. Not searching. Not questioning. Just seeing. When the doors opened again, I stepped out into the lobby, the warm light still filling the space, the same quiet energy moving through it. People passed by, each one focused on their own path, their own destination. No one here knew anything about the messages on my phone, about the confusion at the lake house, about the shift that had taken place. And for the first time, I realized that they did not need to. Because this was not about proving anything to anyone else. It was about finally recognizing something within myself that had been overlooked for far too long. I walked toward the exit, pushing the door open and stepping outside once more, the warm air meeting me again, steady and unchanged. Behind me, my phone remained silent for the moment, the messages waiting. Ahead of me, the evening stretched open, wide and unclaimed. and for once, I did not feel the need to choose between them. The evening air was warm and steady, wrapping around me as I stepped further away from the building, each step unhurried, each breath deeper than the one before. The sky had begun to soften into shades of gold and pale orange, the kind of quiet transition that happens without anyone needing to direct it, without expectation or demand. I walked along the path just outside, the sound of distant voices blending into the background, not pulling me in, not requiring anything from me. For a long time, I had moved through my days with a constant awareness of what was needed next, who was waiting, what had to be done. Now, there was nothing waiting for me except the moment I was already in. My phone remained in my room, resting on the nightstand where I had left it, carrying with it all the messages I had chosen not to answer. I knew they were still there, still trying to reach me, still expecting some kind of response that would restore everything to the way it had always been. But something had changed in a way that could not be undone by a phone call or a quick explanation. Back at the lake house, the situation would have settled into something heavier by now. The initial confusion would have given way to frustration, and then to something quieter, something less comfortable. They would have had to adjust. Meals would not appear on the table unless someone made them. The kitchen would not clean itself. The children would need attention, patience, care. All the small, constant things I had handled without question would now require effort, decision, responsibility. And in that space, something would become clear in a way it never had before. Not through words, but through absence. I slowed my steps as I reached a small open area lined with trees, their leaves moving gently in the evening breeze. The light filtered through them, creating soft patterns on the ground, shifting with each movement of the branches. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet surround me again, letting it settle into something deeper than just a change of scenery. This was not just distance. It was perspective. For years I had believed that keeping everything together meant giving more of myself than I ever stopped to measure. That love meant showing up no matter how I was treated, that being needed was enough to justify the imbalance. But standing there now, with nothing pulling me back, I could see it more clearly. Love without respect becomes expectation. And expectation, when left unchallenged, turns into something that no longer recognizes the person behind it. I turned slowly, beginning to walk back toward the building, my steps steady, my mind quiet in a way that felt earned rather than forced. There was no anger left in me, no need to prove a point or to make them understand through words. What needed to be understood was already unfolding, not because I had explained it, but because I had stepped away from it. When I reached my room again, I paused for a moment before opening the door, taking in the stillness one more time before stepping back inside. The space greeted me exactly as I had left it, calm, undisturbed, holding no trace of the tension that had been building miles away. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up my phone, turning it on once more. The screen filled instantly, messages still waiting, calls logged one after another, a pattern of urgency that had slowly lost its power the longer I stayed away from it. This time, I opened the thread fully, reading through everything without skipping. The tone had changed again. The sharpness had softened in places, replaced by something less certain. Questions that were no longer demands. Messages that paused instead of pushed. And then, near the bottom, one from Daniel that stood apart from the rest. "Mom, I think we have been taking you for granted. Please call me when you are ready." I read it once, then again, letting the words settle without rushing to respond. There was no immediate answer forming in my mind, no instinct to fix or reassure. Just a quiet recognition that something had shifted on both sides. I placed the phone back down, not out of avoidance, but out of intention. I did not need to respond right away. Not this time. Because for once, the space between action and reaction belonged to me. I moved toward the window again, looking out at the fading light as evening settled in fully, the sky deepening into something calm and endless. This moment, simple as it was, felt complete in a way I had not allowed myself to experience before. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had finally stepped into a place where I was no longer defined by what others expected me to be. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.